Hey guys, thank you all for jumping in with us. My name is Nick Moore. I am the Director of Digital Ministry here in Spiritual Life. And next to me, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Jeff Mooney. I'm a professor of Old Testament interpretation and theology here at California Baptist University.
I love it. I am Jacob Ravenscraft, Dean of Spiritual Life. Dr. Mooney, how long have you been here at CBU?
This is my 20th year.
20th?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a good
milestone.
year.
Yeah,
That's a
no,
milestone.
That's why we brought you in. We found out.
This is your
years.
20th year celebration right now.
We got to have him on the podcast. This is awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, so Dr. Mooney, we asked you to sit in with us. We've been going through the book of John in chapel. Specifically, we've been looking at the 7 I am statements. But what we wanted to do here in this space for online chapel is to sit down, have kind of a podcast conversation about these key people that showed up throughout the book of John in Jesus' life and ministry. I just want to kind of have a conversation about who John is, the author of this gospel. If you guys, Jacob, I don't know if you have any questions.
Yeah, let's kick it off.
Yeah.
So you've read the Gospel of John before.
Once or twice.
Good. Yeah, that's good. So what came to mind? I'm just curious, like, you got the email, like, what were some of the things that started coming to mind, or maybe you started jotting down some notes or thinking through?
No, I think one of the, John, for me, is a fairly formative book. It was one of the first books that it became really apparent to me who Jesus was, that Jesus was laying claim, or John rather, was laying claim that Jesus was in fact God, calling him God, which in the first century in a Palestinian Jewish environment would have been just completely and utterly outlandish. And yet he calls him God and points at him and just says it. And so and 3 times in that gospel alone. And so that was powerful to me. And then, of course, the other thing that's amazing to me about John is the weight of the concept of love of God for sinners, love of Christ for the Father, love of the Father and the Son for believers, love of believers for other people and each other. It's such a weighty concept. What love is almost the premier hallmark of a Christian for John. Other apostles might have other modes of delivery and categories that they utilize to describe and distinguish Christians, but John, it's love. If you don't love, you don't belong to Jesus. And so it's like a really, really weighty thing. I think it was the first thing that came to mind for me when I read John, and it's always been a weighty aspect of John. Because that's hard. It's way easier to go to church, jump through those kind of religious hoops, and make sure you stay away from immoral things and do the moral things. But love is something that you almost feel like you can't control. It's so powerful, and so for that to be the hallmark for John means that something radical has happened to these individuals. And so he's not using it to hold over their heads. He's just simply saying this is what happens when this remarkable scenario occurs where Jesus arrests the heart of a sinner by his grace and becomes the life-giving source, right, the vine and the branches, and squeezes and pushes his life through the branches, and the fruit that comes out is predominantly love. And it's just I think it's just one of the more beautiful and slightly terrifying aspects of Christianity.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up about love in contrast to possibly our cultural moment in light of how they define love. How does culture define love? Yeah. So you're saying love a lot. I mean, can you break that down for us a little bit? Biblically here, even in the Gospel of John, how would John define love?
Yeah. So you've got love for God anyway is an action, I think, that does 2 things. It does something for human beings, but simultaneously does something, I wouldn't say for God, but with respect to God. And so, for example, the most famous text where I reasoned out in John is John 3:16.
Of course.
For God so loved the world. Well, the world there in John is not so much the globe, but is a tragic, godless system. That's why later on in the Epistle of John, he says you cannot love the world, which is a really strange thing to say to Christians. Don't love the world, or there's no love of the Father in you. And so, but all he's meaning is this godless system is pitched against God, and God so loved this system unmeritoriously. They offered no merit. He loved them so deeply. He sent Jesus in order to rescue people from this system and make them his disciples. And Jesus comes into the world, right? But the world does not receive him. Light has come into the world, but men, the representatives of the world, love the darkness. Things like that. But Jesus still goes to the cross. There's nothing that the world has done to merit this, and yet God loves them deeply. His love then translates into serious action, redemptive action, and in that action, it makes him look like the only God that can do such a thing, or that would ever do such a thing. No other religion that I know of talks about God loving you to the degree of rescuing you at his own loss, and that's a remarkable aspect of love, I think, in the New Testament, particularly in John. When you get to John 13, and Jesus says, a new command I give you to love one another. I think that that's the same thing. I think that love in John for one another is this expressed physical, probably taking care of physical needs, making sure that one another is cared for, things like that. It's not just simply a sentimental idea or the culture's idea, our particular culture's idea of love, sort of being a ratification of whatever it is that you want to believe about yourself. But this is actually taking care of people, making sure they're cared for. Specifically in the first century, Christians were either a bit clandestine, right, like Nicodemus later on, and or they were persecuted. There's a great little book, I think, by Larry Hurtado, New Testament prof, that he wrote. It's a great little book, and it's genuinely little. It's like maybe 60 pages, and tiny little book. You can get on Amazon. But it's why in the world would anybody become a Christian in the first 3 centuries? And he goes through and he delineates all of these things that were completely against people becoming Christians. That you would lose. There was no prestige in being a Christian. There was no political power in being a Christian. You'd lose the regard of your family. You'd lose your occupation. And yet people are. And his point is, so why was this happening? Because people are becoming Christians in droves in this part of the world, and so when they could lose everything, why is that happening? But they did find something. If you lost everything, you would find something. You'd find a community that was defined by love, profound love that they had all felt like they had encountered in the sacrifice of the resurrected Jesus. And so it became this really prominent, powerful, kind of community shaping, mission shaping, identity shaping, force. Love was, and the way that we talk about it today in our culture seems like a sad way to talk about such a powerful thing. Wow! Because it feels pedestrian. It feels like the only real point to love is so that some individual can feel better about themselves when on the inside it never actually does anything to them. And so for me, that's sad, because I feel like I'm looking at a kid who says he needs to feel loved. That is, validated in whatever it is that kid wants to be and however it is that kid wants to live. But then that kid has to get up tomorrow morning and look in the mirror, and they still know something's wrong. And so love, even this powerful, explosive, electric force that seems to just be the fruit of the life of Jesus, in believers' lives, becomes one more aspect of the Christian life that looks fake to these poor kids that are taught that that this idea of love is thrown around like this.
That's really interesting. If you think about, again, our cultural moment, even of institutions or higher education, the Gospel Coalition wrote an interesting article about a year or two ago, and its title was "Institutions Used to Exist to Form Us, but they're moving now to affirm us."
Yeah, no, that's right.
And so do we see the same definition of love? Like, is that where the culture is defining love as? Is if you affirm me, you love me.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
But
that's exactly what I was talking about. That's love now is used to validate you. Is to say you're okay the way you are, but that's really not love. Like, for example, I tell people all the time, one of the things when I was a pastor at Redeemer that I was privileged to be able to do was do weddings, and I've done almost 80 weddings since 2006, which is really it's got to be some kind of a record. And so anyway, but when we talk, we talk about how genuine love always changes you. Like the idea of finding someone who can love you the way you are and you not. I mean, I would find that hopeless. If I bumped into someone who just was infatuated with me by the way that I was, but didn't really care about me enough to change me, that would be strange.
Yeah,
and it's and I would also say unnatural. Like my kids never sought out to change me, but by becoming a parent, I was changed by these 4 little tykes that were running around that loved me. They made me want to be a better man. They made me want to be more honest. They made me want to be more diligent. They made me want to be more pious. They reminded me that all the things that I talked about on Sundays had real life tangible expressions that they had to be able to access at home and things like that. So it altered me. I couldn't hide behind maybe rhetoric on Sunday morning that perhaps I would have if I had them. I don't know. I hope I wouldn't have, but still.
Sure.
But I had these relationships. People that really love you always change you. And so a love that only validates you but never changes you is not powerful enough to even validate you at the end of the day.
Wow. This thread of love is so powerful. If we took a deep dive at John, he's known as the beloved,
the love
right?
disciple,
Disciple Jesus loved,
So, tell me a little bit more about John. Like, what do we need to know? We're CBU students. Like, what do we need to know about John?
Yeah, John, among all the gospel writers, is really unique. The other 3 gospels are called the synoptic gospels because they're a lot like one another.
Yeah.
John is just a really unique gospel. It's almost like the 3 synoptic gospels, maybe watching a news program, and then John all of a sudden is maybe engaging in a symphony or a concert or something like that. It feels like a different kind of idea and altogether. John was kind of the theologian par excellence of the early church, and so he talks about the way that New Testament scholars talk about it is that John has this very high Christology. So he talks about Jesus as God, pretty routinely and multiple ways, and for example, calling him God in John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. He was with God in the beginning. Later on, he's the only one that's ever seen God, is the only God, the Father's bosom. Later on in John 20:28, Thomas confesses, Jesus, my Lord and my God. And so John records all of this. And for him, this is really important. Yeah. And so for John, it's also often highlighted that John's writing this gospel so that people will believe. So if that's John's purpose, which is obviously it is, since he stated it, then it's easy to figure out what the engine of that belief is, and that is a proper and true explanation of who Jesus is. And so you get this Jesus who is 100% God, 100% man. He is all the things that human beings long for. He is light, he is bread, he is the door, he is the life that pumps its way through the vine into the branches. He's all of these things. He's Savior, he's risen Lord, he's conquered death. He's all of the greatest stories in the world multiplied by millions, and so this is the thing that John really leans into. He's called the beloved disciple through the book. And scholars go back and forth on, first of all, who the beloved disciple was. I assume that we're going to begin probably here by just saying it was probably John. There are other options that people go through, like Lazarus, for example. And that's because in John 11, Jesus actually references Lazarus in that way. But I actually think that, and it's not, he doesn't call him, John doesn't refer to Lazarus as the disciple whom Jesus loved, but through one of his sisters says the one you loved.
Right.
And so I kind of use that to sort of, you could probably talk to Andreas Vera or Jeff Cade or, Dan Wilson. They could probably just defang all I'm about to say, but I don't think so. I think that statement about Lazarus is a way that John hints toward how he's referring to himself. I don't think that when John refers to himself as the beloved disciple, he means that Jesus loves him more than all the other disciples.
Yeah.
But I do think that he's signaling a very intimate relationship that he has with Christ.
Yeah.
And Lazarus and Mary and Martha had a very similar relationship, and Peter and James clearly have that kind of relationship as well. And so I think he's doing that. I think that he chooses to do that rather than name himself for maybe a couple of reasons. Number one, I think he is decentering himself from his own gospel, which is sensible, since his whole point is for you to believe in Jesus. And he also is wanting to highlight the stuff that engineers faith, which is who Jesus is and this entire ministry of Jesus, which is also a clear aspect of why he refers to himself as the beloved disciple. He does it typically around areas that are really central to the testimony of Jesus. The Last Supper, pushing his mother towards John as a son to mom kind of relationship. Now the resurrection, post resurrection, with Peter in that interesting conversation in chapter 21. And so, I think that I think it's all about his identity, but I think it does signal that he did have a uniquely intimate relationship. He was in the inner circle with Peter, and they seem to be leaders within the church, and I think they were leaders in the church because of how they gave themselves to Jesus when in Jesus' earthly ministry. So
we see John have this, like, he's around, he wants to be really close to Jesus. Physically, right?
You kind of see like this, like John is like ever present throughout Jesus's ministry, and I think that's what really brings him to write this gospel, right? And that's what I kind of love about the fact that he doesn't use his name, that he's referring to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. It's to me, it's like, it shows this like humble spirit that this is not about me. But then there's also this this idea of like I'm secure and I know who I am. Excuse me. This like to me, like it communicates like I know my identity and who I'm secured in, like, and it's my relationship with Jesus. And we just see this like nearness from John with Jesus, like being part of the inner circle. But then there's like he was just there, like kind of all the time, just Jesus' shadow in a lot of ways, which is really fun.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, you see that connection between the physical and just that deep, intimate relationship with Jesus. And this series, right, being sort of this, like, okay, what are the human responses to Jesus, who's God of the universe? Like, I mean, we see this obvious interest in who Jesus is, but I love how you're talking about the engine that is running this whole thing, the answer to the question. So, I mean, as you start to think of the connection to students, like, man, I'm a student here at CBU, like, so interesting about John, like, but he got to like see Jesus in person. Like, what's that application as we see like the human response to the God of the universe?
Yeah, I think that I can't remember where I read this.
You read a lot. It's okay.
I think that one of the points that John makes and the other Gospels make is that the pre-resurrected Jesus is not for you to see. But that's not for you to see. Is the Jesus that you should long for.
Oh, wow.
Is the post-resurrected Jesus. It's the Jesus that rose from the dead, conquered death, alive forevermore, advocates for you, daily basis, lives, indwells in your heart, binds you to other believers. That's the Jesus you can actually know.
Wow.
The pre-resurrected Jesus, the Jesus before he died. I mean, he is everything he is.
Yep.
But I think John is calling you to believe, because this is all written after Jesus has died and resurrected. Mm-hmm. John is calling you to believe in the resurrected Jesus, and so I think that's the drive that when I get to share the gospel with students, or when I try to always make room to talk about significant elements of the gospel at least once a week in my lectures, and particularly my genetic classes, is I'm pushing people towards the resurrected Jesus, the historical Jesus. I'm fascinated by on multiple levels, but the resurrected Jesus is the one who's crushed death and who's brought who's given me life so that I will live and die on this earth when I live and die, and I do it as completely as ambitious as I can, and as full throttled as I can. I live life because I'm not afraid to die, because death has already been absolved from me, and so it's the resurrected Jesus, I think, that gives freedom and genuinely makes people who do not feel loved deeply loved, profoundly loved, and so I think that would be my answer to people who talk about, he saw Jesus. But he wrote this after Jesus rose from the dead. That's what really motivated this. It was he wasn't just an ancient historian that said, "Well, I knew this guy, so I think I'll like Josephus or Herodotus or someone like that." And so he believed that everything changed. Nothing was the same. And so that's how I think I would answer. I was going to go back, if you don't mind. One of the decentrary aspects is really amazing to me, is because in the United States, we have this really strong sense of celebrity culture in the church. And so isn't it, I just, when I was going back through, after you sent me the email, I was going back, that first time I went through that, I just remember thinking how strange that this guy, it's strange to Americans, I would think, like us, this guy, he is in Jesus's back pocket. He is one of the premier leaders of the church, and he bends over backwards to get out of the limelight because he's so convinced he's not the point. And I don't know that means, I think if John was here, he would say, well, yeah, but that's not because I'm any more or less sanctified than any other believer, but I am profoundly convinced of how important Jesus is. And I don't know why I would be. I don't know why I would get in the way of that. It's just fascinating to me that John, he just had that idea. Just not really seemingly interested in being named or being in the way, just wanted everything to be focused on who Jesus was and what Jesus had done, so that people could believe. And that was, I think it's a fascinating thing.
As students look for a church, a community to be a part of, a faith community, is that a helpful filter for them as they're looking to the pastor, to leaders of the church?
I think so. I think that you, and that was, that's coming from me. I think, for a long time at Redeemer, that was how Redeemer was probably known, was by my name. But that was intentional on my part, though, and so I had no interest in that. It's just, my personality tends to lend itself towards things like that. I would say, if you can find a place that is taking both Jesus seriously and everything that Jesus took seriously, then I think it's a really great place to go to church.
Man, you covered a lot, like just at the beginning, jumping into John.
I've probably talked too much.
No, I love it. I just want to try to connect the dots a little bit here. Like, it's so neat to have this really high level view of the Gospel of John as a narrative of Jesus' life and ministry, like from uniquely John, this gospel that's set apart from the synoptics, and he approached it and engineered it, completely differently and strategically, and had these like profound, very, significant theological frameworks that he was working through. Man, we have such a wide spectrum of students, like where they're at in their spiritual life. And so for us in our role here, we want to always be like really good stewards of where our campus is. So, almost 7,000 undergrads. Yeah. And at least a third not Christians, over 2,000.
Yeah, sure.
And so here a lot of, okay, Bible says this about these parts of life.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But like hearing you talk about John and, his relationship with Christ and his like arguably like just consumed with like who this person is.
Yeah, sure.
What's the encouragement? What's the application? What's the takeaway for the non-believer?
Yeah, sure.
And then even for the Christian who's around non-believers, like help us, guide us a little bit in that. Like, what should we care about? What should we be focusing on?
So I think that I think John would say, the very first thing you really have to be informed about is you have to be able to talk about Jesus as to who Jesus is. Not so, you need to be able to talk about who Jesus to you, that's fine, but you really need to be able to talk about who Jesus is, because who Jesus is the kind of the heartbeat of that gospel. I think it's the heartbeat of all the gospels, but really the heartbeat of the Gospel of John. And so when you, in John 5, for example, when you, around verse 18 or so, when Jesus has healed the guy on the Sabbath, they're ready to, they're mad at him, and he says, my Father is always working, so I'm working also with them, and they lose their collective minds, and they start to kill him. And Jesus says, why are you trying to kill me? And they respond, because you called God your Father, comma, in that text, making yourself equal with God. And so for John, the important thing for John was, you need to understand that Jesus is laying claim that he is in fact God. To say that you're the Son of God means you're God. Say that you're the son of a duck means you're a duck. To say that you're the son of God means you're God. And everyone in that context knew that's what he was saying. That's why they're trying to kill him. This is the premier question: who is Jesus? For a non-believing student, I think that is a key question, because it's super easy to kind of embed yourself and talk about the English word G-O-D. And the reason I say it like that is because I'm really confident that not just that 1/3 of people that would claim to be non-believers, but maybe a chunk of the kids that we have that are believers, or that would claim to be believers, would define that word in ways that are extraordinary, if you laid it up against the Gospel of John. And so you can get really awash in God, but the whole point of the Scriptures, the Old Testament, everything is pushing towards this appearance of God here. And so who is this God, and who are we because we belong to him, become significant questions. So who is this God for the non-believer? Who is Jesus? Who is he God? If he's God, then this means something that something radically is different about the world that I live in. And I remember that when I became a Christian reading the Bible.
Why were you reading the Bible?
I was raised. My mom and dad were Christians, and my brother and I were raised in I would say a Christian home, and I had become an atheist at college. For for probably more just wanting to live my life immorally rather than it was. I wish I could say that it was because I had all these incredibly taxing intellectual questions, but I just really wasn't that ambitious. I was just a lazy, immoral kid, and Christianity was nothing but a chain and a
Rules.
ball on my leg, and so. I ended up going to New York, and I got there. I decided I would read the New Testament. I had developed a friendship with two guys. One guy was really way past me when it came to moral issues and stuff like that, and the other guy was maybe one of the best Christians I'd ever known. And so I decided that I would read the New Testament. And in reading the New Testament, I remember I was offended at Jesus because of what he was saying, because he was saying things and laying claim to himself in ways that were, and it took me a while to finally get, oh, that's what he means. He really does. He's saying he's God. So this changes everything. Because no one else had ever done this, and so this is a radical kind of idea. And if Jesus is God, and if Jesus rose from the dead, then the world is not what you think it is, and the world is not what you think it is, like to an insane exponent.
Wow.
I think that's one of the things I would say for a non-believer, and for the believer, I would say it's the same thing. It's Jesus. If Jesus is God, and if he's risen from the dead, then if you're claiming to be a Christian, you have to live like you believe you are the servant of a king and the king who has conquered death. So you cannot be drawn in and redefined by American politics or by your ethnicity or by what it is culturally to be conservative or liberal, or what it is to be. You can just stack all the things that vie for our identity.
Wow.
But your identity has to be bound up in Jesus, and so when you celebrate with the Lord's table at church, or when you sing songs together with people, you stand beside people that you would probably never know, never hang out with, other than the fact that you both have been rescued by Jesus, and now you're more than just someone you stand around singing with. Your family. You're embedded into something, and so your identity, your entire identity, has to be sort of embodied by these things that John is saying.
Wow.